They almost missed her entirely. Just a shape in the snow, half buried under a soft white blanket that had fallen quietly for days. The ranger, Nathan, nearly walked past, his boots crunching across a forest that felt emptied of life by the endless cold. But then something caught his eye, flicker of brown against the pale drift, a fragile breath clouding the frozen air. Nathan paused, heart knocking against his ribs. He'd been a wildlife ranger for years, long enough to know the forest could hide quiet tragedies. This part of the woods hadn't seen human footprints in weeks. He bent down, brushing snow away with gloved hands that trembled more from hope than cold. What he uncovered made him catch his breath. A dog, battered and barely alive, her fur stiff with ice and a hind leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Her eyes fluttered open just enough to meet his dot. Nathan whispered softly, as if speaking to a lost friend, "Hey girl, you're not alone out here, are you?" But it was what came next that truly froze him. Pressed tightly against the dog's chest, buried in her warmth, was something wilder lynx cub, no older than a few weeks. Tiny paws twitching as he shivered. His eyes, sharp and frightened, locked onto Nathan's face with a desperate sort of defiance. For a moment, Nathan forgot to breathe. He'd seen animals cross paths before, sometimes even sharing waterholes or shelters in desperate times. But this wasn't survival next to each other. This was something closer. The dog had curled her body around the cub, sheltering him as though he were her own pup, and the cub, clinging to her frozen fur, refused to let go. Snow kept falling, soft and soundless, covering them again, as Nathan radioed for help. The words felt strange on his tongue. "I found a dog. And there's a lynx cub with her." The voice on the other end hesitated before answering. "Repeat that." Nathan's mind spun with questions. Where had they come from? How had they found each other in a forest that had been silent for days? The tracks around the hollow tree told part of the story. One large, heavy set of paw prints, and a smaller, lighter set, circling again and again, as if they'd been searching for shelter or, maybe, each other. Gently, he tried to separate them. The lynx cub hissed and bit at his glove, tiny teeth barely scraping leather. The dog whimpered, her body shifting protectively, even in pain. Nathan pulled back, realizing the only way to move them was together. He wrapped them both in his thick ranger's jacket, feeling the slow, shallow rhythm of the dog's breathing and the frantic, tiny heartbeat of the cub pressed against her. They felt impossibly fragile as he made his way back through the snow. Nathan kept glancing down, half afraid that by the time he reached help, they'd both be gone. But the cub's eyes stayed open, watching him with a mix of fear and fierce determination. And the dog, though her eyes closed again, kept one paw draped over the cub, as if her last purpose in the world was to keep him safe. The outpost was a blur of motion, hands reaching to lift them, quiet orders murmured between medics and wildlife. Staff. The dog was old. Nathan heard someone say it, maybe 9 years, with a broken hip and frostbite setting in. The lynx cub had no tag, no sign of a mother anywhere nearby. Nobody really knew how long they'd been out there or how they'd survived. Some guessed the dog had once belonged to someone, maybe a hiker who abandoned her, or got lost themselves. Others thought she'd been wild for years, a ghost of the forest who somehow still had love to give. The cub, on the other hand, was pure instinct and fear. He lashed out at anyone who came close except her. They tried to separate them for treatment, but the cub's cries were so raw, so panicked, that the vet decided to keep them together. Wrapped in a single wool blanket, the dog's head resting beside the cub's tiny body, they finally settled. Nathan couldn't look away. He'd spent years protecting wildlife, rescuing animals caught in traps or wandering roadsides. But he'd never seen anything like this. The quiet bond between two creatures who shouldn't have shared more than a passing glance, now tied together by something stronger than fear or pain. As night fell, Nathan stood at the edge of the clinic room, the snow still melting from his coat. He watched the cub tuck himself tighter into the curve of the dog's belly, and something inside him ached, a mix of sorrow and hope. The dog's breathing was ragged, each rise and fall of her chest a fight. But when the cub stirred, she shifted, as though even on the edge of life, her first thought was still to protect him. Nathan found himself whispering again, barely louder than the hum of the heater. "Hang in there, girl. He still needs you." Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet and relentless, as though the world itself was holding its breath. In that small room, under the dim light, a wounded dog and a frightened wild cub lay side by side, two hearts, stubbornly refusing to let go of each other. Nobody knew what tomorrow would bring. Would the dog survive the night? Would the cub accept food without her warmth? The questions hung heavy in the air, unanswered and urgent. Nathan stayed, watching through the glass, waiting for any small miracle in a winter that had already taken so much. And that's where we'll leave it, for now. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about what comes next, but about the moment hope holds on, even when the cold tries to take it away. Morning came slow and pale, the first weak light catching on frost, still clinging to the windows. Nathan had barely slept, his mind turning over questions he couldn't answer. Who had this dog been before the snow? Where was the lynx cub's mother? And why did it matter so much to him that they'd found each other in the end? The clinic staff had named the dog Willow, for the way she bent and sheltered the cub despite her own brokenness. The cub they called Ash, his fur the color of burned wood and his spirit as wild as the wind that cut through the pines outside. Ash still refused to be touched. When the vet reached in to check Willow's stitches, Ash hissed and clawed, eyes wide and unblinking. But the moment Willow lifted her head, weak as she was, Ash pressed against her and fell silent, his sides rising and falling with hers. Nathan found himself coming by, even when he wasn't on shift. He'd stand by the glass, coffee in hand, watching Ash drop little gifts at Willow's paused twigs, scraps of bark, even once a feather that must have blown in from somewhere. Willow accepted each one quietly, eyes half closed, as if every small offering was worth more than anything else in the world. A few days later, the story broke out beyond the forest. A local paper ran a piece. A ranger found a dying dog in the snow. What was beside her left him speechless. Soon after, people started showing up at the small clinic, curious to see the pair that had somehow survived together. Some just peered through the glass, whispering to each other. Others asked if they could help, bringing old blankets and bags of food. A little boy pressed his hand against the glass, and for a second Ash's gaze met his before flicking back to Willow. Yet, outside those walls, the questions kept growing heavier. The wildlife team debated what to do next. Ash was wild by nature, meant to roam mountains and forests, not live behind glass. Willow, with her shattered hip and age, would never survive out there again. If they stayed together, Ash might never learn the instincts needed to live free. But if they were separated, would Ash survive at all? Nathan argued for them to stay together. They found each other out there, he said, voice rough from too many late nights and too little sleep. If we pull them apart now, what are we? Saving him for— But others reminded him that Ash was a lynx, a predator that would grow larger and stronger. Someday, instinct might win over love. Someday, Ash might turn. At night, Nathan lay awake, replaying those words, staring at the ceiling until dawn. Each morning, he'd walk back to the clinic, half afraid the cage would be empty, or that Willow wouldn't lift her head. But each time, there they were, curled around Ash, and Ash pressed so close you could barely see where one ended and the other began. One evening, the decision came down. Ash would be moved to a wildlife sanctuary up north. It was larger, better equipped, and far from humans. Willow would stay behind, cared for by volunteers. The plan felt cold, practical, necessary, and it weighed on Nathan heavier than he expected. When the day came, Ash sensed something was wrong. The moment strangers approached with gloves and crates, he turned wild. He lunged, hissed, and when they tried to lift Willow out, he shrieked a raw, piercing sound that made even the staff hesitate. Nathan stepped forward, speaking low and soft, but Ash wouldn't calm. In the end, they managed to separate them, though Ash clawed until his paws bled. And Willow's heart beat so hard, Nathan feared it might stop. That night, Ash was gone. The sanctuary reported he had escaped, slipping through fencing nobody thought a cub could fit through. Nathan joined the search parties, combing the woods with a flashlight, calling out, though Ash would never answer. The forest felt different, now emptier somehow. Snow had started falling again, fine and silent. Days passed. On the 5th morning, a volunteer unlocked the shelter before sunrise and froze. Curled beside Willow's crate, thin and hungry but alive, was Ash. Willow's nose pressed through the bars, touching his fur like she'd never let him go. Ash had found his way back, crossing miles of forest, back to the one place he felt safe. That night, nobody spoke of sanctuaries or release. Nathan saw it in everyone's faces. They couldn't do it again. Willow had given Ash something that fences and feeding schedules never could. And Ash had chosen her, over freedom and instinct, again and again. Word spread, and soon people weren't just coming to look. They came to sit quietly by the glass, to leave donations, to ask if there was anything Willow or Ash needed. A kind farmer, whose land stretched to the edge of the woods, offered them a home together, a warm barn, a fenced pasture, and quiet acres where Ash could roam but always return. When they arrived, Willow stepped carefully on the grass, her limp still there, but her tail raised just enough to catch the breeze. Ash darted ahead, circled the trees, but came back to rub against her side. In the fading light, Nathan watched them together and felt something tighten in his chest, hope so fragile it barely dared to breathe. But even in peace, time moved forward. Willow's fur turned silver, her hearing dulled, yet every day she greeted Ash with a slow wag of her tail. Ash grew powerful shoulders and sharp claws, but he never hurt her. When Willow limped to her bowl, Ash walked beside her, guarding every shaky step, and each night, he curled beside her as though nothing in the world could matter more. As the seasons changed, Nathan visited when he could. He'd stand by the fence, watching Ash drop feathers and leaves at Willow's paws, the small offerings of a wild heart still tethered by love. Yet each visit felt a little more precious, a little more fleeting. Then came the spring morning, when Willow didn't rise. Ash nosed her gently, whined low in his throat, and lay beside her as the sun climbed higher. Nathan arrived to find them like that. Ash pressed close, eyes half closed, as if refusing to see what had happened. By evening, Willow was gone, buried. Under the shade of a pine tree she had often rested beneath. Ash sat by the grave through the night, silent and unmoving. When dawn broke, he was gone. Tracks led into the woods, deeper and deeper until they vanished among the pines. No one truly knows where he went. Some say he turned wild and free, finally claiming the life he was born to. Others swear he still circles back on quiet nights, leaving feathers on the porch as if to say, "I remember." But those who saw them together remember something else, a wounded dog and a wild cub who found each other when the world had left them both behind. And as the snow falls again, somewhere out in the woods, you can almost believe that love like that doesn't end. It just waits, quiet and stubborn, ready to bloom again when two lost souls cross paths. As spring turned to summer, the story of Willow and Ash kept living on, shared in quiet voices by neighbors and visitors who had once stood by the fence to watch them together. Nathan found himself thinking of them on long walks through the forest, tracing old paths where snow had long since melted and wildflowers pushed up through damp earth. But even with the seasons changing, there was still a hollow feeling where Willow had been. Then, one early morning, Nathan returned to the farm, hoping for a sign that Ash might still be close. He walked the tree line, eyes scanning for any sign of feather, a tuft of fur, broken twigs. For hours, there was nothing but the hush of wind and the scent of wet grass. Just as he turned to leave, Nathan froze. By Willow's grave, under the pine tree, lay a fresh trail of feather, soft, gray, and arranged almost in a careful circle. At the center, pressed into the earth, were faint paw prints, larger now than Nathan remembered, but unmistakable. Ash had returned. Nathan knelt beside the feathers, running his fingers over them, feeling the weight of all the unspoken moments. Ash had grown into the wild lynx he was meant to be, yet something had pulled him back to this place. A final goodbye, or a promise that part of him still belonged here. Nathan couldn't be sure, but his chest tightened with quiet relief. The bond hadn't vanished with Willow's last breath. It had only changed shape. For a while, Ash returned every few weeks, always at night. Sometimes he left feathers or leaves by the porch. Once, Nathan caught a glimpse of him between the trees, a flash of gray fur and sharp eyes that watched, cautious but not afraid. In those brief moments, Nathan understood something that had been waiting to surface. Ash wasn't just wild or tame, he was both. Willow hadn't changed what he was. She had shown him it was possible to love and still belong to the world beyond fences. The farm, once quiet, slowly became a small sanctuary for animals in need. Inspired by Willow and Ash's story, people began bringing in lost dogs, injured foxes, and orphaned fawns. Some stayed a while before returning to the wild. Others found a home like Willow had, and though Willow was gone, her spirit lived on in every small act of kindness, in every creature given a second chance. Nathan often found himself telling visitors the story from the very beginning, how a dying dog was found in the snow, with something wild pressed against her side, how they had refused to be parted, and how love had shaped a bond so strong that even the forest couldn't erase it. He watched their eyes soften as they listened, saw how people leaned in closer at the part where Ash escaped the sanctuary and returned to Willow. That moment always held them a wild heart, choosing love over freedom, even if only for a little longer. Years later, when Nathan himself grew older, the story of Willow and Ash still carried through the town. Children who had once visited the farm brought their own kids, pointing to the pine tree where Willow rested and telling them about the lynx who still circled back on silent nights. Some believed Ash still watched from the shadows, a guardian of the place that had once saved him. In the end, the real story wasn't about where Ash went, or even how long Willow lived. It was about what they taught everyone who paused long enough to see it. That family isn't decided by blood or by species, but by who stays when the world turns cold. It's the ones who choose to protect us even when they're broken themselves. And so, in quiet moments when snow begins to fall again, it's easy to imagine Ash somewhere out there, pausing at the edge of the clearing, ears pricked as though listening for a heartbeat he once slept beside. Maybe he doesn't stay long. Maybe the wild calls him back. But for a moment, there's a soft reminder that love, once given freely, doesn't vanish. It becomes part of the earth, the wind, and the quiet places where lost hearts still find each other. And that's where this story ends, not with an answer to every question, but with the simple truth Willow and Ash left behind. Love doesn't need words, and family doesn't always need to look the same. Sometimes, it's just who lays beside you in the cold and refuses to leave. And that kind of love, it stays, even when everything else fades.